This video is sponsored by Premium Sound, one of the UK's premier dealers located in Kensington, London, with an online store carrying a comprehensive inventory to cater for a variety of needs. For more details, click the link in the description. I need to right a wrong. I got through the whole of 2023 without reviewing any CD players, so I thought there's no point doing things by half measures. Why not get 3 sub £1,000 CD players in at the same time? Actually, these group tests work quite well to do A/B comparisons, but listening to these CD players was like a trip down memory lane to my youth when I used to periodically work at a hi-fi store. This was the early to mid-90s when the Arcam Alpha was one of the most popular CD players sold in the shop. If memory serves, it sold for around £400. For a little less, you could get the equivalent Marantz CD player, which was also very popular. The model designation seemed to change annually, but sometimes not much was different internally. People went for the Arcam if they wanted a more mature sound. It was warmer and richer, but sometimes the Marantz alternative offered more detail. Now, 30 years later, these two brands are still going for it head-to-head. Both Arcam and Marantz have launched new CD players recently, indicating that there's plenty of life left in the format. But we're not in the 1990s, and it's hard to ignore offerings from Chinese brands these days. So I pitched the latest CD player from Arcam and Marantz against SMSL. I find out how these CD players compare to each other, but I'm also curious to find out how they compare to streamers at a similar price. The Marantz CD60 retails for £849, but can regularly be found on sale with dealers for less than 650 quid. I quite like Marantz's industrial design with the two-tier front panel in black, but the silver finish of my review sample looks more obviously plastic. I guess the thin folded steel chassis is acceptable for the price. This is a substantial unit though, dwarfing many amplifiers in this class. It measures 442 by 129 by 396 millimeters and weighs 7.5 kilograms. That's 17.4 by 5.1 by 15.6 inches and 16.5 pounds. The CD60 has a notably smooth draw mechanism, but the button layout is a little counterintuitive. I think the play button should swap places with the open close button, so it's next to the ones that skip forwards and backwards through tracks. The CD60 will also play music stored on flash drives of up to 192 kHz 24-bit PCM as well as DSD. The drive needs to be in a supported format. Menus are basic, there's no gapless playback, but it's still a useful feature. The CD player also has a 6.25mm quarter-inch headphone socket with a little dial to adjust the volume. The supplied remote control gives access to full functionality, including the ability to toggle between 2 digital filters, put albums or tracks on repeat, and dim the display. On the rear is a set of single-ended RCA analog outputs, coaxial and optical digital outputs, and a set of RCAs to integrate remote function with other compatible Marantz devices. The Marantz CD60 has a DAC based upon an ESS Sabre 9016 K2M chip that must be heading for retirement. The unit does incorporate Marantz's HDAM technology, deploying discrete components in the output stage to lower noise and distortion rather than op-amp ICs. The Marantz CD player is the least coloured in this group test. The other two definitely impart some kind of flavour, which to some extent is going to polarise opinion, but it's clear that the master tuner who sits down with Marantz products and voices them was going for the CD60 to sound as neutral as possible. In the context of price-appropriate systems, it offers very good all-round performance. I'm talking about speakers and amplifiers that retail for less than £1,000. My reference system at a modest price comprises the £599 Q Acoustics 5020s, dynamic and rich sounding speakers that combine well with slightly lean sounding amplifiers with good driving ability, like my £449 Iota VX SA3. With the Marantz CD60 as a front end, that system ticks all the fundamental areas of performance. The soundstage extends a little bit beyond the speakers left and right. There's no real soundstage depth, nor would I expect there to be, but everything sounds pretty natural and it's fairly easy to track the main performers within the mix. My mid-tier reference system comprises the £1,500 Amphion Argon 1s in the wood finish, still the best speakers I've heard for the money, powered by the £1,850 Exposure 2510, which overall remains my favourite amplifier in its class. The CD60 is out of its depth in this class. Everything sounds small and muddy. I just didn't hear deep enough into the recordings to do the Exposure Amphion system justice. That's why most CD players have digital outputs, so I connected the Denafrips Aries 12-1 DAC via the CD60's coaxial output to assess its effectiveness as a CD transport. The soundstage opened up considerably and there was a lot more detail. I'll talk about comparisons to the other two CD players as I go through this review, but it's clear that the CD60 has well implemented digital outputs. For now, let me just mention how it compared to other streamers at this price. I recently reviewed the Cambridge Audio CXN100, pitching against the Eversolo DMP-A8 and the Bluesound Node X that I previously reviewed in November 2023. I'll link to both reviews in the description. Essentially, the Eversolo is very detailed but a little bit bright. The Bluesound trades some of that detail for a wider soundstage, beefier bass and warmer mid-range, and the Cambridge sits pretty much between the two. The Marantz CD60 is similar to the Cambridge Audio streamer in tonality. The CXN100 is a little bit more coloured on the warm side, but the streamer has slightly better instrument separation and resolution. The Marantz CD60 uses a much older DAC chip than the one found in the Cambridge Audio CXN100, but it's still pretty close in terms of overall fidelity. So where does that leave me? Well, I know that the CD60 is regularly found on sale for around £650, where it represents very good value, but I have to ultimately judge it based on its MSRP of £849, and there it's a little pricey. The Marantz CD60 gets a solid recommended from this channel. The whole of the SMSL PL200's chassis is constructed from one billet of aluminium. You won't find any screw holes on the top, sides or back, just on the bottom where the centre has been CNC machined out to accommodate the circuitry. The build and finish are stunning for a unit that retails directly for about £550 plus shipping and taxes, so that's circa £700 in the UK all in. The compact device measures just 200 by 42 by 175mm and weighs 1.7 kilograms. Imperial measurements are 7.9 by 1.7 by 6.9 inches and 3.7 pounds. The PL200 is a joy to interact with. A top-loading player is the closest that digital audio gets to a turntable experience, but it isn't just for fun. Not having potentially noisy draw and motor mechanisms can yield sonic advantages. Initially, I thought the piano key style buttons for play, pause, stop and shuffle were a gimmick, but they're actually useful for a unit that's likely to be placed on a desk or sideboard. My only niggle is that I wish that the spring loading under the keys offered a bit more resistance. The central function knob that takes the unit out of standby can be rotated for volume attenuation and pressed to access the menus. Functionality is replicated on a plastic remote control that's fit for purpose, but not the aluminium of SMSL VMV devices. There's various settings that can be adjusted in the menus, including some interesting PCM digital filters that I'll discuss later. The PL200 has both balanced XLR and single-ended RCA analog outputs. There's also optical and coaxial digital outputs to use with external DACs. The USB-C input is handy to connect to mobile phones, but I'd prefer a full-size USB-A input to connect to flash drives. I also wish SMSL would stop adding Bluetooth receivers on their higher tier products. They're likely to have little value and can be a potential source of noise, especially when they've gone to the trouble of employing the top-of-the-range AKM 4499 D2A chip, which uses a separate AK4491 IC for delta sigma modulation and digital filtering. That's the same dual-chip architecture found in the £1,899 Eversolo DMP-A8. The SMSL PL200 has excellent resolution for a circa £700 player. It isn't going to pull as much information from recordings as the Eversolo DMP-A8, but it is comparable to the Eversolo DMP-A6. The DMP-A6 is the most resolving streamer I've reviewed to date in the sub £1,000 category, but it can sound a little harsh. I'd be itching to upgrade for a linear power supply as soon as the unit was out of warranty. It's striking how similar the SMSL PL200 is to the Eversolo DMP-A6. Both have excellent bass definition, a mid-range with crisp transients, and an open top end that can get a little fatiguing, although it is the SMSL CD player that has better high-frequency refinement. The Eversolo streamer has a soundstage that extends a little wider, but within the soundstage, ultimately it's the CD player that has the better imaging. These traits are evident when fronting my IOTA VX SA3 amplifier and Q Acoustics 5020 speakers. You hear more information than the Marantz CD60 renders, but the tonal balance also shifts from neutral to analytical, making the trade a matter of taste. That isn't the case stepping up to my Exposure 2510, powering my Amphion Argon 1 speakers. Here the extra clarity swings the balance of virtues in favour of the PL200, even though the cool tonality is still apparent. In the context of that system, I hear a nice decay to notes and also the precise location of performers, not only just left to right, but also some sense of soundstage depth. It's clear that the PL200 has excellent timing and what it delivers is more than respectable, but I'd still like a little bit more soundstage width and body in the mid-range to feel that I was getting the best out of the Exposure Amphion combination. That's why I hooked it up to my Denafrips Aries 12-1 via the SMSL's coaxial digital output. My reference R2R ladder DAC at circa £1,000 is capable of delivering just what was missing. But in order to do so, the PL200 needs to offer a clean digital output. It doesn't. It sounded dirty and harsh, making this CD player pretty useless as a CD transport, and that's a shame. But before I wrap this section up, there's just one more thing that I want to cover. The PCM filters don't fundamentally alter the character of this device, but do have some effect. The default sharp roll-off filter offers the best clarity, whilst most of the others sound pretty dull. The short slow filter is useful though. It pulls back the highs a little bit, adds a sprinkling of warmth in the mid-range and greater bass weight. All that's traded for a little bit of resolution, but the resulting increase in low frequency ambisonics also helps to increase the soundstage width marginally. All considered, this is a superbly built and capable sounding device, just don't plan on using it as a CD transport. The SMSL PL200 gets a highly recommended from this channel. The CD5 is Arcam's new entry-level CD player, retailing for £699 and measuring 431 by 83 by 344 millimeters, tipping the scales at 6 kilograms. That's 17 by 3.3 by 13.5 inches and 13.2 pounds. I'm enamoured by the new radius styling. The nicely understated font, recessed buttons and subtle yellow highlights lend a certain charm. The matte black curved aluminium shell elevates build quality beyond most full rack width units at this price. There are a few ergonomic quirks that Arcam need to iron out. Firstly, with the door open, pressing play doesn't close the door and start playback. Having to press the open close button again and then press play is irksome. Also, when halfway through a track, pressing the back button skips to the previous track rather than the current one. That should only really happen in the first few seconds of playback. Again, requiring 2 button presses rather than 1 seems unnecessary. But the supplied remote control is nicely finished. It is plastic but of a quality that exceeds expectations. It's required to access menu functions, which includes the choice of 3 DAC filters. A cowl over the top cleverly conceals connections at the rear. When viewed from above, there's a set of single-ended RCA analog outputs, coaxial and optical digital outputs. Unlike the SMSL PL200, the Arcam CD5 has a proper USB-A input to access music stored on flash drives. The Arcam Radius CD5 has a DAC based on the ESS Sabre 9018 K2M chip. It's slightly higher spec than the 9016 chip found in the Marantz CD60, but it's still getting long in the tooth. If the Marantz CD60 has a sound that's similar to the Cambridge Audio CXN100 streamer, and the SMSL PL200 comparable to the Eversolo DMP-A8, well, then the Arcam CD5 is akin to the Bluesound Node X. Despite its diminutive size, the Node X is a big dynamic sounding device, largely down to bass that's delivered with impressive weight, and a mid-range that has great harmonic saturation. The Arcam CD player doesn't quite have the scale or instrument separation of the Bluesound streamer, but it's comfortably the biggest sounding of all the 3 CD players being tested here when it comes to soundstage. It also isn't quite as rolled off in the top end as the Node X, and has a little bit more presence in the upper mid-range, which gives a little bit more energy to lead vocals and instruments. Still manages to maintain some liquidity in the mid-range whilst doing that, and it reminds me of many Arcam products that I used to listen to in my youth. You could listen to them all day without any weariness. That's exactly what's needed to smooth rough edges off many components at lower price points. As good as my Iota VXSA3 and Q Acoustics 5020s are, they're not exempt from that criticism. With my Exposure 2510 and Amphion Argon 1s, the CD5 proved to be the most satisfying CD player in this group to listen to over long listening sessions. However, there were trade-offs. The Arcam CD5 has no obvious digital artifacts in its presentation, but it doesn't have the bass definition, transient snap or lockdown imaging of the SMSL PL200. The Marantz CD60 has the most neutral presentation of all 3 of these CD players, but it's a step behind the other 2 when it comes to resolution. Those differences get magnified when the CD5 is used as a transport. Performance shifts to another level with the Denafrips Aries 12-1 in tow, with some of the sonic characteristics of the Arcam still coming through. I guess this is a player for those reluctant vinyl converts, not because all turntables sound warm and cozy, they don't, but you're less likely to hear something artificial coming out of a modestly priced turntable than a digital device of equivalent value. A lack of digital footprint, very good resolution and a big sound is exactly what this CD player delivers. The Arcam CD5 gets a highly recommended from this channel. It was interesting comparing 3 CD players with each other and streamers at a similar price. I was fortunate to have them all here at the same time to be able to do so many direct A/B comparisons. There was no giant killing going on or one product blowing all the others out the water. The final analysis was a lot more nuanced than that, with comparative strengths and weaknesses. That might not grab headlines, but it's a sincere representation of what went on. My question of the day is, what has your CD journey been like? Please share that in the comments section. All that remains for me to say is, if you like what I'm doing with this channel, you want to see it grow, and assuming you haven't done so already, please like, share, subscribe, hit the bell notification. Check me out on Patreon. There's a couple of consultancy tiers you can access there if you think I can help you on your audiophile journey. Also, check out the ABA Club on Patreon, which has some great ways to interact with me and fellow Patreons. But for today, for now, British Audiophile, signing off.